Welcome back to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast, the Replay series. I'm your host, Tracy Chernoff, and I'm thrilled to have you join us once again as we journey through the episodes that have topped charts around the world. In this podcast series, we're revisiting some of our most insightful, thought-provoking, and transformative conversations with industry experts, thought leaders, and practitioners. These episodes have made waves, sparking meaningful conversation and inspiring positive change throughout human resources. Whether you're a dedicated listener who's been with us from the start or you're just tuning in for the first time, the Replay series offers a chance to dive deep into the core principles that guide our exploration into HR practices. So get ready to rediscover the discussions that continue to shape the future of HR. Without further ado, let's step back in time and immerse ourselves into the podcast's top charted episodes. Let the replay begin.
Wherever you're listening to this, and if you have someone that maybe really needs to hear this episode, share it with them when you're done listening if you think it's going to help them out. Because this week we are talking about quiet quitting. And if you follow me on Instagram at @HRTracy, then you know that I have quite the opinion on this, and I wanted to kind of go through that, but also kind of just share that, like, what it is and a different perspective potentially. So, which you guys know I'm always good for challenging the status quo. Anyway, so what is quiet quitting? We're hearing this a lot. It's coming up a ton in like content and the press and media. It's everywhere. Quiet quitting is basically this concept that people are, instead of like just leaving their jobs because they're disengaged or not enjoying what they're doing, that they're basically just not going above and beyond, and they're doing like the bare minimum, and that's that. So here's my perspective on quiet quitting. I think there is nothing wrong with doing exactly what you're hired to do and never going above and beyond. There is nothing wrong with doing exactly what you're hired to do. And maybe that's 9 to 5, maybe that's 70 hours a week. It depends, right? But that is my perspective, that there's no such thing as quiet quitting. This is just a matter of people setting boundaries for themselves and their lives and saying, I want not only balance, but I want there to be a line between when I'm working and how often I'm working and when I'm enjoying my personal life. And this is, we could have predicted this, right? And actually, we did predict this, that during COVID, everyone had this reckoning, this awakening to the idea that there's more to life than work. And especially in the United States, this is like a foreign concept because we have this perspective that the harder you work and the more you work and the more you hustle, that you'll get more out of it as a result. And sure, there is something to that, right? Like the more you put into something, the more you get out of it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go above and beyond or that you have to work 1 million hours a week to be successful. So, this concept, and again, I've talked about this on my Instagram also, this concept of quiet quitting is being looked at totally in the wrong way. And I have seen HR people talk about it. I've seen business people, non-HR business people talking about it. I'm seeing a lot of these people basically saying like those people are disengaged and you need to check in with them and you need to prevent quiet quitting. But is that really true? Like, I don't think so. One, I don't think that the amount that someone works measures how engaged they are, because that's just a way that they can become more burnt out. So actually, I would prefer if someone is more balanced in their approach to work. Two, like, just because someone is setting boundaries for their work and personal lives does not mean that they're disengaged. Like, we have come so far in the way that we think about engagement, the way that we think about work, the way we think about being successful and what that looks like and how to be successful and how we define success. But this, to me, it's just like, again, it's kind of like, you take a circle and you've got a target in the middle. Like, we're just kind of going around the target. We're just not hitting it. And so I think when we hear quiet quitting, my reaction is always like, seriously, like, why are we talking about this? But the other reaction that I have is like, we have to understand that those who have kind of defined quiet quitting or, have started talking about it are potentially not the people that we're talking to about engagement and retaining teams and things like that, right? Because we're still seeing business leaders talking about how they, like, employees have to go back to the office 100% of the time, or flexibility is something that only happened in COVID or during COVID, or things like we need to be in the driver's seat again, employees can't like run the show, like all of those conversations, all of those perspectives are kind of like mirror this perspective that quiet quitting is a bad thing and that quiet quitting equals disengagement. And I am here to say, like, no, that's not true. Quiet quitting is not intrinsically or inherently bad. And it's not a marker for engagement. And there might be folks out there listening to this who vehemently disagree with me. Totally okay. I would love to hear your perspective. But I think we have to like really challenge this idea. Quiet quitting is, first of all, misrepresented and it's mislabeled. And like, the reality is that if someone is quote unquote quiet quitting, they're setting boundaries for themselves, they're still engaged. Why they could just go and loud quit and like find a different job if they are disengaged. The other thing is that actually this person or these people who are quiet quitting and maybe are disengaged, because I think you could be quiet quitting and engaged, and you could be quiet quitting and disengaged. I see, first of all, I don't even want to call this quiet quitting because I don't agree that it is quiet quitting. Maybe it's just like quiet balance or quiet rebalancing. But I say that because I think that you can, quote unquote, quiet quit and be engaged, or you can, quote unquote, quiet quit and be disengaged. So if someone is disengaged and they are quietly rebalancing, then actually this is an opportunity to continue to retain them because they could have just left. So it's not, it's almost like an opportunity to check in, to almost like validate that it is okay to have balance and that people should have balance and that that's how we maintain some semblance of a work life and a personal life. And so I think if I were noticing a shift in someone's behaviors or performance where like maybe they were working like 80 hours a week, like crazy, always on, to then like having an away message, having balance, not always being on, having those boundaries, I actually would probably recognize it. And I would probably say like, hey, this is something I've noticed. Hopefully everything's okay, but I just want to say I think it's great that you're creating more balance for yourself. That is probably how I would handle that situation if, for whatever reason, I felt like someone was disengaged. And I guess it could look like someone is disengaged if they go from being like always on to having boundaries. But why should that be a measure of engagement? Like, why shouldn't people have boundaries? And this is where I think, like, who started this? Who started this idea of quiet quitting? Is it the CEO from that one financial banking firm that I've reposted on Instagram who thinks that people who want careers need to return to the office and people who just want jobs will continue to work hybrid? Because that person, yeah, I could see this coming from that person. And also, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, head to my Instagram. I did a reel on this. I can't. That's all I can say. I just can't. You can have a career no matter where you work, no matter how often you work, as long as you're putting in the work that you need to put in and doing the job that you're supposed to do, and maybe going above and beyond sometimes. That's also okay. You can have balance and also go above and beyond. Like, it's not all so black and white. You know what? I think I just solved it. This is how I know quiet quitting did not come from an HR person. And if it did, I want to speak with that person, but it didn't come from an HR person because we do not live in the black and white. We live in the gray. So we would never have come up with such a staunch, like, black and white concept that people are not multidimensional beings with multiple avenues of thought and feelings to be setting boundaries and still engaged in their job. I honestly, sometimes I feel like I'm speaking into a void because we've been talking about things like this for so long now, since the start of my podcast, that like people are more than just their jobs and like they need to have balance. So why are we talking about quiet quitting? Now I'm just getting annoyed. Anyway, let me not go too far into a tangent there. So we talked about the quiet quitting on the disengaged side. The quiet quitting for the engaged person, again, let's not call it quiet quitting. This is like a quiet rebalancing. No one needs to know that you're rebalancing. You just are. And this, like I can tell you personally, I am someone that always, probably up until the last couple of years, like going above and beyond was the norm. There was no bare minimum. There was no just doing my job. There was always coloring outside of the lines, always going above and beyond, because in my mind, that is what would create the most success for me and the fastest amount of success. I do think in some ways it did that for me because I climbed fast and I learned fast and everything was fast. But at the same time, there's always a sacrifice. When you're doing, like, it was easy when I wasn't married to just like, throw caution to the wind and just work as much as I could. But now I'm like, oh, well, I kind of want to be able to end my day at a certain time. I kind of want to be able to, plan out my day. So it's like, I work for a certain amount of time and then I am in my personal life for a certain amount of time. And, I think I'm realizing that actually, even though I still go above and beyond, I'm not necessarily reacting with such like this momentum like I did in the past, because it just like burns you out. I always used to burn the wick at both ends. Is that the phrase? And my family was always like, you're gonna wither away. Like, you gotta create some balance. And I'm finally learning that they are right. And I can still be a high achieving overachiever, because you can be an overachiever and not high achieving, but I am still a high achieving overachiever with a million things on my plate, but I have balance. And that balance, even though I quietly rebalanced, like between my roles and in like transitioning into a new work environment and stuff like that, like I was able to almost like reinvent myself in some ways. And even though the podcast is like basically a second job for me, I still create balance within it. So I am here to tell you that you can quietly rebalance and still be highly engaged, highly successful, and highly effective. So I don't know who came up with this quiet quitting thing, but it's bad. Can I tell you the content that irritates me the most about quiet quitting is the content helping people to navigate this situation. I can't take it. I can't take it. There is no situation to navigate. There's literally nothing there. If I could like get this podcast onto every speaker and like play this one part that I'm about to share, like for every single person in the world, they don't even have to subscribe, rate, or review, I would love it. There is literally nothing going on. Let people have their balance and their boundaries, okay? That's all. That's all I want to say. That's it. That's the end of the episode. No, I'm just kidding. The next time someone, says to you, how are we going to handle quiet quitting? This is what I want you to tell them. Let's just say their name is Shirley, okay? Shirley, listen, we're friends. I'm going to be candid with you. There's nothing going on. There's nothing we need to say. What do we need to do? We need to make sure that our, expectations for people are reasonable and fair. We need to make sure that we have good benefits and perks like we've been talking about for the last few years. And we need to applaud people who are rebalancing, because they're not quiet quitting. They're not quitting at all. If they're going to quit, they're going to loud quit. And that basically means they submit their resignation or they just leave, right? So there is no quiet quitting. We want to appreciate that people are setting boundaries because we've expected people to ditch their personal lives and not have any boundaries at all and burn out. So this is a great thing. And that is what I want you to say the next time someone brings up quiet quitting. There is nothing to assess. There is nothing to worry about. There is something to worry about if your people are leaving because they don't have work-life balance. See where I'm going here? I know I'm being like a little like sarcastic with some of these things, but it's just because I'm kind of like irritated. How do we keep talking about the same thing and yet we're not learning anything? And we keep talking about the same thing. If you're watching me on video, you're seeing my eyes are like getting really wide, and I'm using all of the hand gestures that I have in my arsenal, with the exception of ones that are profane. But really, it's like so mind-boggling to me that we continue to talk about the same things without solving the problems that we are not including in the conversation. People are quietly rebalancing because businesses have asked them to ditch boundaries for too long. Businesses have asked people to go above and beyond and burn out from both ends for too long. So people are rebalancing. They're like, yeah, my husband, my wife, my spouse, my partner, they're saying I'm not really around. So I'm going to balance that out because you know what? They matter to me. That part of my life, which is much more important than my job, even though everybody has to make money somehow, but still, let's call a spade here. People's personal lives are more important than the work that they do because we get one life to live, and it's all of that stuff that means the most, right? Family's everything, love's everything, all that stuff, right? So they're rebalancing because that matters, and people are going to leave. They're going to loudly quit. I quit. I'm resigning. I'm leaving. I'm going somewhere else. Whatever that loud quitting is, they are leaving potentially because they did not rebalance. They did not set boundaries. They weren't afforded the opportunity to set boundaries because their employer didn't get that there was a balance to be had. So again, quiet quitting is not what we should be focusing on. We should be focusing on why people are rebalancing and why we continue to make it difficult for people to set boundaries. Because if we didn't make it difficult for people to set boundaries, we wouldn't even be talking about quiet quitting. The only reason why we're talking about quiet quitting is because someone doesn't like that boundaries are being set. Right? Why else are we talking about this? We should be celebrating that people are rebalancing their lives and that they're setting boundaries. But instead, we are talking about how we need to address that and how we need to check in to make sure that everything's okay. That everything's okay because I'm setting boundaries? Like, that doesn't make sense, right? Imagine you go up to someone, you speak to someone, hey, I've noticed you started setting boundaries. Is everything okay? Hey, I noticed that you're working like 9 to 6 every day. Is everything okay? That's insane. That is totally insane. Make sure that you are not that person. And maybe you are that person. Maybe you did go up to someone because quiet quitting was like the thing that your boss was like, we have to make sure nobody's quiet quitting. That's fine. You didn't do anything wrong. However, if you didn't go back to your boss and say, listen, we are focused on the wrong thing. We have to focus on why people feel they need to set boundaries and why we are expecting people to constantly go above and beyond, because that is that's the crux of the issue, right? That is root causing the problem, not focusing on people setting boundaries. And actually, on this point, when it comes to like going above and beyond, I'm the first one to say that there will be times where you cannot work 9 to 5, 9 to 6, or 8 to 4, or whatever your typical 8 or so hour workday looks like. There will be times where you have to go above and beyond, or you have to pick up the slack, or you have to work extra hours. And that is totally okay. And I think people need to, everyone, we all need to be okay with that. And I know that there is definitely a feeling of I need to get paid more to do that. But at some level, I don't agree with that all the time, because you also want to show that you're a team player and you want to prove that you are, willing to see the team succeed. And sometimes you don't get paid to do that, to go that extra mile, to do that thing that is equivalent to going above and beyond. And so I think we all have to be okay with that. Not everything is something that is charged by the hour. And if you want every single thing that you do to be, invoiced, then you should be in consulting, or you should be doing something that's paid by the hour. Because when you're in a salaried position, or, a position that doesn't necessarily have a start and end time, it is what it is. And I do think that that's where your willingness to help and support the team from an overall general effort perspective, that goes a much longer way than nickel and diming your employer, because then in the end they'll be like, oh yeah, she really helped. She really made sure that the team won that day or won that week or that project or whatever. And that really does go a long way. But aside from that, going above and beyond every day is obviously not healthy. There are boundaries to be set. And maybe it's not even going above and beyond. Maybe it's just not having work-life balance. And I don't even know if work-life balance as a phrase cuts it anymore. It's work-life boundaries. Because if you set boundaries, then you're inherently always balanced, right? Or you should be. You're striving for balance when you have boundaries. So maybe it's not work-life balance, it's work-life boundaries. If you know that you have let's say you have a flexible work schedule, and you know that between the hours of 6 and 8, that's family time, you're setting up boundaries, and maybe you pick up work again after 8 if that's something that in your world, in your work environment, is cutting into the day or cutting into your work. This is where I'm going to say this until I'm blue in the face. True flexibility is allowing the person to decide what is best for them. There are days where I am most productive between 7 and 10. And then after 10, I'm noodling. I just can't put thoughts together sometimes. And then there are days where I'm productive for 12 hours at a time. But then at the end of the day, I can't even make dinner, So everyone is productive at different times in different ways. And this is where I think true flexibility is saying, hey, employee X, you're going to set your boundaries. You're going to choose, the way that you get your job done. As long as it gets done, that works for me. That is true flexibility. That is true autonomy. And so if we keep talking about this BS, quiet quitting, we're going to continue to miss the mark and continue to miss solving for that root cause problem, which is that businesses are not always reasonable in what they expect from their employees. So with that, I'm going to leave you with one final message here, other than don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe, and share this with someone who you think will enjoy it. And that is that quiet quitting is just a replacement for the things that we've been talking about. It's just another scapegoat. It's another phrase that we're hooked onto to try and justify bad business practices. It's putting the ownership and the onus on the employee, saying that, well, they are not going to be successful, or they are not going, they are quitting, they are disengaged because they're setting boundaries. And yet again, we're in the same place where there is a business case, something to solve at the business level, and instead we're putting it on the employee. So we have to really challenge some of these things. When we hear it, think critically, quiet quitting, I don't know. And immediately I was what is this? And why are we even talking about boundaries like they're a bad thing? So, let's all be better business leaders. Let's all be better HR leaders and think critically about these things that crop up, and be part of the true solution. Being part of the solution is not trying to understand why an employee is setting boundaries. Being part of the solution is trying to solve the business challenge that is resulting in someone feeling like they need to set better boundaries. Okay? So with that said, I so appreciate that you are here for this episode. We are coming up on 100 episodes of this podcast. I've got something fun planned. Make sure that you are subscribed to the show. Share this episode with someone who maybe needs to hear it or who you think could find this interesting or could totally disagree. This is a great way for us all to expand our knowledge. And if you've been here or if you've listened to my past episodes, you know that I do not think it's a good thing to have everyone around you agreeing with you. It's extremely important that we all challenge the status quo and we all think differently and have people around us who bring diversity of thought. Make sure you're also following me on Instagram at hrtracy, that's Tracy with an I, and I will see you next Tuesday for another episode.
Hey, just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to this show so that you are the first to hear when an episode drops each week. And maybe leave a 5-star review and a comment about how much you loved this episode. Plus, if you have someone in mind who would really enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.